The morning of my son's rehearsal dinner, I walked into a bakery expecting to pick up a cake, and instead, I overheard a conversation that nearly destroyed my entire life. What I heard in the next 10 minutes involved $58 million, and the person leading it was my own son. I didn't react. I didn't speak. I just stood there, completely still, as every word drifted down through the vent above me, clear and impossible to misunderstand. If you're still here with me, imagine this for a second. Imagine realizing the person you trust most in the world has been quietly planning to take everything from you, and you only have a few days to stop it. That morning started like any other. I drove to Martinelli's bakery just after 9, the same place that had been part of my life for over 30 years. They made my wedding cake in 1988. They made the cake for my husband's funeral in 2011. Every birthday cake my son ever had came from there. It was familiar, safe, predictable, until Gina grabbed my wrist. Her hand was cold. Her grip was tight. And her eyes. I had never seen fear like that in her before. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice barely steady, "don't react. Don't say anything. Just come with me." There are moments in life where your instinct tells you something is wrong before you understand why. This was one of them. I didn't ask questions. I followed her. She moved quickly, past the ovens, past the cooling racks, through a narrow hallway I had never noticed before, and into a small office behind the walk-in freezer. The air changed immediately. Colder. Quieter. She closed the door and pressed her finger to her lips. And that was when I heard them. Voices. 3 of them. My son. His fiancée. And a third voice, one I trusted more than I should have. Dr. Alan Prescott. My heart didn't race. It dropped. "She'll sign the amendment Saturday night," Daniel said, calm, controlled, like he was discussing something routine. Right after the toasts. She always gets emotional after champagne. I felt something tighten in my chest. Brooke's voice came next. Soft. Careful. "And if she reads it?" There was a pause. Then Daniel laughed quietly. "It's buried on page 9. Mom trusts me. That's the whole point. Mom trusts me." The words didn't hurt the way you'd expect. They landed, and then something inside me went completely still. Because a part of me recognized something in that moment that I didn't want to see. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't pressure. This was planned. Then Prescott spoke. His tone was clinical, detached. "I've documented 6 episodes of cognitive disorientation over the past 4 months," he said. "Once the amended trust is activated and my report is filed Monday morning, the conservatorship will be approved by Wednesday." I stopped breathing. Conservatorship. Full control. Everything transferred. Assets, properties, business authority. Prescott continued. Complete control transfers to Daniel. Brooke asked the question that made everything real. "How much are we talking about?" Daniel didn't hesitate. 58 million. The number didn't echo. It settled. Heavy. Final. $58 million. Everything I had built. Everything I had protected after Richard died. Every decision. Every sacrifice. Every sleepless night. Reduced to a number in a conversation I was never supposed to hear. Prescott continued, like he was scheduling an appointment. "Placement can be arranged within 90 days. Sunrise Meadows. Private facility. Very discreet. Placement. Not care. Not support. Placement. Like I was something to be moved. Removed. Managed." My legs gave out beneath me. I didn't even realize it until I felt Gina's hands catching me, lowering me carefully into the chair behind me. I sat there in the dark, listening to my only child calmly plan the end of my life as I knew it. The voices continued. Timing, signatures, logistics. But I wasn't hearing details anymore. I was hearing truth. And the truth was, this hadn't started today. When the footsteps finally faded and silence returned, Gina turned on the desk lamp. The light felt too sharp, too real. "They were here last week too," she whispered. Same conversation. I looked at her slowly. "How long did you hear?" "Enough," she said. "They're going to take everything from you." I nodded once. Not in shock. Not in disbelief. In recognition. Because somewhere, deep down, something had already been trying to tell me this. I had just chosen not to listen. My hands rested calmly in my lap. Steady. Controlled. "Where's my cake?" I asked. Gina blinked, confused. "What?" "The cake," I said again. "The lemon vanilla. For tears. Is it ready?" She stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for something. Anger, panic, anything. But I gave her nothing. Because in that moment, I understood something clearly. Not every betrayal deserves an immediate reaction. Some betrayals deserve a response. A precise one. She left the room without another word. A few minutes later, she returned, wheeling in the most beautiful cake I had ever seen. White fondant, gold leaf, delicate sugar flowers cascading down each layer. It's perfect, I said softly. Then I looked at her again. I have 4 days. And in those 4 days, I was going to decide exactly how this story would end. I drove home with both hands steady on the wheel, even though nothing inside me felt steady anymore. The road was familiar, the same turns I had taken for years, but every mile felt different, like I was moving through a version of my life I no longer fully recognized. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check my phone. I just drove, because I needed the silence. Not to calm down, but to think clearly. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't get out right away. I sat there with the engine off, my hands resting on the steering wheel, looking at the house in front of me. The same house. The same place I had walked into thousands of times without thinking. And yet, something about it felt different now. Not the house itself. The way I was seeing it. The front porch. The windows. The Japanese maple in the yard. Richard planted that tree the year Daniel was born. He said it would grow with him. That it would change with the seasons the same way a life does. Slowly, quietly, without asking permission. I used to stand out there and watch Daniel play beneath it. Back when everything was simple. Back when I thought I understood exactly who he would become. I let out a slow breath and finally stepped out of the car. Inside, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet I had learned to live with after Richard passed. Not empty, just still. I set my purse down on the kitchen counter and rested my hand there for a moment. That counter had been the center of everything once. Homework, dinners, arguments, laughter, the years when Daniel still talked to me without hesitation. I could almost hear it if I stood still long enough. But I didn't stay there. I walked down the hallway and into the living room, stopping in front of the wall of photographs. Daniel at 5 years old, missing his front tooth, smiling like nothing in the world could ever hurt him. Daniel at 16, standing in his graduation gown, trying to look serious but failing. Daniel the day he joined the company, standing beside me, confident, composed, already stepping into a version of himself I thought I could trust completely. That word stayed with me longer than anything else. Trust. I remembered exactly what it took to get to that moment. Richard died in 2011. Pancreatic cancer. He was 54 years old. We had been married 23 years. Daniel was 19, halfway through college, still trying to figure out who he was without his father. And I didn't have the luxury of falling apart, because everything else was already starting to collapse. The business had been struggling before Richard got sick. After he passed, it nearly disappeared. Clients left. Contracts were canceled. Revenue dropped faster than I thought possible. Our accountant told me to file for bankruptcy. Our banker told me to sell the Portland warehouse. Everyone told me to stop, to walk away, to accept that it was over. I didn't. I refinanced the house. I renegotiated contracts. I drove across the state, Salem, Eugene, Bend, meeting clients face to face, rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. I changed the direction of the company completely. We moved away from residential design into commercial work, hotels, restaurants, boutique spaces that required consistency, structure, and long-term relationships. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But it worked. Within 2 years, we stabilized. Within 5, we were growing again. And by last year, Mitchell Creek Interiors was valued at $28 million. Everything I built, everything I protected, everything I believed I was building for Daniel. I moved away from the photographs and walked toward the window, looking out at the yard. Nothing outside had changed. That's the part people don't talk about. When something breaks, the world doesn't shift with it. It stays exactly the same. Only you change. I thought about Daniel coming back after graduation. He didn't ask for a position at the top. That mattered to me. He started in the warehouse. Inventory. Logistics. No shortcuts. No special treatment. He worked his way up, project manager, operations, executive vice president. He earned every step. And when I gave him a seat at the table, it wasn't because he was my son. It was because I trusted him. Completely. That trust is what made this possible. I let that thought settle for a moment before pushing it aside. Because right now, I didn't need to understand how it happened. I needed to understand when it started. Brooke came into our lives 2 years ago. Daniel brought her to one of our events. She was exactly what anyone would expect: polished, articulate, composed. She knew how to move in a room, how to speak, how to listen. She made people feel comfortable quickly. That should have been the first sign. But it wasn't obvious. Nothing about this was obvious. That's what made it effective. The changes didn't happen all at once. They never do. They started small. Comments that sounded like concern. Suggestions that I should slow down. That I had done enough. That maybe it was time to step back. At the time, it made sense. I had been working nonstop for years. Of course I was tired. Of course I was under pressure. And then came the moments that stayed with me. Forgetting something minor. Repeating a point in a meeting. Arriving somewhere and feeling like I had missed a step. Each moment small enough to dismiss, but consistent enough to notice. And every time it happened, someone was there. To notice it. To confirm it. To make it feel real. That's how doubt works. It doesn't appear all at once. It builds. Slowly. Quietly. Until you stop trusting your own judgment. I closed my eyes for a moment, hearing Dr. Prescott's voice again in that room above the bakery. Calm. Controlled. Detached. 6 documented episodes. 6. All false. All planned. I opened my eyes and looked around the room again, not as it used to be, but as it was now. Nothing had changed, except my understanding of it. This hadn't started that morning. It had been building for months. Carefully. Deliberately. And I had allowed it to happen because I believed I was safe. That was the part that stayed with me the longest. Not the betrayal itself, but the fact that I never saw it coming. I turned away from the window and walked back into the kitchen, reaching for my phone. My movements were steady. My thoughts were clear. For days. That was the time they thought they had. Now it was mine. And I wasn't going to spend those 4 days trying to understand why my son had done this. I was going to spend them making sure he didn't succeed. I didn't call anyone right away. That was the first decision I made. Not because I didn't know who to call, but because I understood something clearly now. If I reacted too early, I would lose the only advantage I had. They thought I didn't know. And that belief was power. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and let the silence settle around me. Not empty silence. Not calm. The kind of silence that forces you to look back and see what you missed. Because something about this didn't start at the bakery. It couldn't have. I walked slowly into my study and closed the door behind me. The room still carried Richard's presence in small ways. The books he never finished, the chair he always used, the quiet weight of decisions made inside these walls. I sat down at the desk and didn't open my laptop. Not yet. Instead, I let my mind move backward. Not guessing. Not assuming. Remembering. The first moment came to me faster than I expected. A client meeting. Late last year. We were presenting a commercial expansion plan. Numbers, projections, timelines. Everything was prepared the way I always did it. Halfway through, Daniel interrupted me. "Mom, you just said that 2 minutes ago." His tone wasn't aggressive. It wasn't disrespectful. It was casual. Almost helpful. I paused. Looked at my notes. Had I? For a second, I wasn't sure. That was new. I had run hundreds of meetings over the years. I knew how I spoke, how I structured information, how I repeated key points when necessary. But that moment stayed with me. Not because of what he said, but because of what I felt. Doubt. Small. Quiet. But real. Brooke leaned forward slightly, her expression soft, concerned in a way that felt natural at the time. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked. The room went still. Not because something was wrong, but because someone suggested that it might be. I smiled. Continued. Finished the meeting. No one questioned it again. But something had shifted. Inside me. After that, the moments came more often. Not obvious. Never obvious. Forgetting a minor detail. Repeating something I thought I hadn't said yet. Checking my calendar twice, then a third time, just to be sure. Each moment small enough to dismiss, but consistent enough to build a pattern. And every time it happened, someone was there. Daniel noticing. Brooke reinforcing. Maybe you've been working too much. You've been under a lot of stress. It's normal at this stage. At this stage. That phrase stayed with me. Because it suggested something without saying it directly. That I was changing. That I was declining. That something was wrong. I stood up from the desk and walked toward the bookshelf, running my fingers lightly along the edge of old files and reports. I had built this company from nothing once. I knew what pressure felt like. I knew what exhaustion felt like. And this didn't feel the same. This felt constructed. That realization didn't come all at once. It built slowly, the same way their plan did. There was another moment. A board meeting. Quarterly review. Vivian was there. Daniel. Brooke. A few external advisors. I remember walking in feeling prepared. Focused. Clear. Halfway through the discussion, Daniel stopped me again. You already covered that, he said. I looked down at my notes, then at the screen, then back at him. For a second, I hesitated. Not because I was wrong, but because I couldn't immediately prove I was right. That hesitation was enough. Brooke stepped in again. Maybe we should take a break, she said gently. You've been going nonstop. No one challenged it. No one questioned it. Because it sounded reasonable. That was the pattern. Everything sounded reasonable. That's what made it dangerous. I walked back to the desk and finally opened one of the folders. Board transcripts. Meeting notes. I flipped through them slowly. Carefully. Line by line. Everything was consistent. Clear. Structured. There were no repetitions. No confusion. No decline. Only the suggestion of it, spoken out loud often enough to feel real. That was when it became undeniable. They weren't reacting to a problem. They were creating one. Step by step. Conversation by conversation. Until it became believable. Even to me. I leaned back in the chair, letting that settle completely. This wasn't about one moment. This was about months of preparation. Controlled. Intentional. Precise. And the part that stayed with me the most wasn't just what they had done. It was how easily it worked. Because I trusted them. That trust wasn't just emotional. It was structural. I gave Daniel access. Authority. Visibility into every part of the business. Because that's what you do when you believe you're building something together. And Brooke, she didn't force her way in. She was invited. Accepted. Integrated. That was the mistake. Not one moment. Not one decision. A series of small ones that led to this. I closed the folder and placed it back exactly where it had been. My movements were slow. Controlled. There was no panic in me. No confusion. Just clarity. The kind that removes doubt completely. I reached for my phone again, this time without hesitation, and scrolled through my contacts. There was only one name that mattered now. Claire Yamamoto. My attorney. My thumb hovered over the screen for a fraction of a second. Then I pressed call. Because if they had spent months building a case against me, I was about to start building mine. I arrived at Claire Yamamoto's office just before sunset. The building was quiet. Glass walls. Clean lines. The kind of place where everything felt documented and nothing was left to interpretation. I had been there before. Many times. Contracts. Negotiations. Expansions. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't protecting a business. I was protecting myself. Claire opened the door before I could knock. One look at me, and she knew something was wrong. Eleanor, she said, stepping aside. Come in. No small talk. No questions yet. Just space. I walked in and placed my purse on her desk, then remained standing for a moment, letting the room settle around me. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. The bakery. The vent. Daniel. Brooke. Prescott. The amendment. The timeline. The number. 58 million. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I gave her facts. Because facts are what matter when everything else is falling apart. When I finished, the room went completely still. Claire didn't react immediately. She turned to her computer and started typing. Fast. Focused. Pulling up documents. Legal structures. Case references. Then she stopped. Turned back to me. This isn't estate planning, she said. Her voice was calm. Controlled. This is coordinated fraud. The word didn't shock me. It clarified everything. Fraud. Not misunderstanding. Not concern. Not family conflict. A plan. Structured. Intentional. I sat down across from her, my hands resting calmly in my lap. If I sign that document Saturday night, you lose control immediately, she said, finishing the thought before I could. Her tone didn't change. Once the physician's report is filed, the court will accept it unless there is documented evidence challenging your capacity. And if there isn't, it goes through. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just truth. I nodded slowly. That matched exactly what I had heard in that room above the bakery. Every detail. Every step. Claire leaned forward slightly. Right now, we don't argue with them, she said. We don't confront them. We don't react emotionally. Her eyes held mine. We prepare. That word landed differently than anything else. Prepare. Because that meant there was still time. Not much, but enough. What do we need? I asked. Two things, she said immediately. First, independent medical evaluation. Someone with no connection to Prescott. We establish, in writing, that you are fully competent. She paused. Second, evidence. Not suspicion, not belief. Evidence. Financial records. Asset movement. Anything that shows intent. I thought about Crestline, the name Daniel had mentioned. They've already started moving things, I said. Claire didn't look surprised. Then we're already in response mode, she said. She stood up and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a file and placing it on the desk. This kind of structure doesn't happen overnight, she continued. It takes time. Planning. Coordination. She looked at me directly. They didn't decide this last week. I held her gaze. I know. That was the part that mattered most. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't pressure. This was deliberate. Claire returned to her desk and picked up her phone. I'm bringing someone in, she said. Financial investigator. Former federal. If there's a trail, he'll find it. She stepped out briefly to make the call, leaving me alone in the office. I didn't move. I didn't reach for anything. I just sat there. Because for the first time since that morning, everything was clear. Not emotionally. Structurally. They built a narrative. Decline. Confusion. Incapacity. Then they built a solution. Control. Transfer. Removal. And I had been placed at the center of it, without ever being told. Claire returned a few minutes later. He'll meet you tonight, she said. 9:30, off Highway 26. His name is Ray Delgado. I nodded once. Between now and Saturday, she continued, you don't change anything. Her tone sharpened slightly. No confrontation. No deviation from routine. They need to believe everything is proceeding exactly as planned. I understood. That belief was our advantage. If they think you know, she added, they accelerate. Or they disappear. And if we move first? I asked. We control the outcome, she said. Simple. Direct. I stood up slowly, taking in everything she had said. For days. That was the timeline they built. Now it was mine. Claire walked me to the door, then paused. Eleanor. I turned. If we do this, she said carefully, it won't stay private. I didn't respond immediately, because I already knew what she meant. Legal action. Public exposure. Consequences that don't disappear. And at the center of it, my son. I held that thought for a moment, then let it settle. He's already involved, I said quietly. Claire studied me for a second, then nodded. Then we moved forward. I stepped out into the evening air, the city lights beginning to come alive around me. Everything outside continued the way it always had. People walking, cars moving, conversations happening. No one knew. No one could see what had just shifted, but I could. And for the first time since that morning, I didn't feel uncertain. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt focused, because this wasn't about understanding anymore. It was about execution. And in 4 days, this plan wasn't going to end the way they expected. I left Claire's office after sunset and drove straight to the diner she had mentioned. Off Highway 26. The kind of place most people pass without noticing. Dim lights. Half-empty parking lot. A neon sign that had probably been there longer than I had been running my company. It was quiet inside. Not silent, just controlled. Low conversations. Coffee cups. The steady rhythm of a place that doesn't change. He was already there. Corner booth. Back to the wall. Facing the entrance. Ray Delgado. I knew it was him before he looked up. There's a certain way people sit when they're used to watching everything. Measured. Still. Nothing wasted. I walked over and sat across from him. He didn't stand. He didn't introduce himself. He just looked at me for a moment, then said, "Tell me everything." No small talk. No setup. So I told him. The bakery. The vent. Daniel. Brooke. Prescott. The amendment. The timeline. 58 million. I didn't rush. I didn't add anything unnecessary. Just facts. Because that's what this had become. A situation that required clarity, not emotion. He listened without interrupting, writing occasionally in a small notebook. Each note short. Precise. When I finished, he didn't respond immediately. He closed the notebook halfway, then looked at me directly. Your son, he said. Is he leading this, or being led? The question stayed in the air longer than I expected. Because I realized something in that moment. I didn't actually know. I had assumptions. I had instinct. But I didn't have proof. I don't know, I said. He nodded once. That matters, he replied. Because it changes how this ends. He opened the notebook again. Access, he said. corporate accounts, personal accounts, anything he touches. I didn't hesitate. He has access to everything, I said. Operations, financials, contracts. I gave him that access because I trusted him. Ray didn't react to that. He simply wrote it down. They always do, he said quietly. Not judgment, just observation. He flipped to a new page. The doctor, he said. How did he come into your life? Recommended, I said. Then I stopped. Because something about that answer wasn't complete. By who, he asked. I already knew the answer before I said it. Daniel. Ray wrote that down. No reaction. But something in the way he paused told me it confirmed more than it revealed. If there's a structure behind this, he said, I'll find it. Shell companies, asset transfers, offshore routing. Anything they think is hidden, he added, usually isn't. I leaned forward slightly. How long? 72 hours, he said. No hesitation. 3 days. That left 1 day before Saturday. 1 day before the plan executed. Can you stop it? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his notes, then back at me. That depends on what I find, he said, and what you're willing to do with it. That part didn't take time. Anything, I said, because at that point, there wasn't another option. He closed the notebook. Slowly, deliberately, then stood up and left cash on the table. Go home, he said. Act normal. Same instruction Claire gave. Same reasoning. Let them believe everything is still on schedule. He paused for a second, then added, people make mistakes when they think they've already won. That stayed with me, because it meant something simple. They believed they were ahead, which meant they weren't being careful anymore. I watched him walk out of the diner without looking back. Then I sat there for a moment longer, the noise of the room fading into something distant. This wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't even betrayal. It was structure, a system, and I was inside it. But not the way they thought, because now I could see it clearly. I stood up, left money on the table, and walked out into the night air. The parking lot was still, the same as when I arrived. Nothing about the world outside had changed. Cars passed on the highway. Lights moved in the distance. People continued their lives, unaware that mine had just shifted completely. I got into my car and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. 3 days. That was what Ray needed. For days. That was what they thought they had. And somewhere between those two timelines, everything was going to collide. I started the engine and pulled out onto the road, the headlights cutting through the dark in a straight, steady line. For the first time since the bakery, I didn't feel uncertain. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt focused. Because this wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about building something of my own. A case, a response, an outcome. And in 72 hours, I was going to know exactly what I was dealing with. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. Sleep would have slowed me down. And right now, everything needed to stay sharp. I lay on top of the covers fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, letting every detail replay, not to relive it, but to organize it. The bakery, the voices, the timeline, the structure, Claire's words, Ray's question, leading or being led. By the time the first light came through the window, something inside me had shifted. The shock was gone. What remained was clarity. At 5:42 a.m., my phone vibrated on the nightstand. Unknown number. I answered immediately. Delgado, he said. No greeting. No delay. Found something. I sat up slowly, my feet touching the floor. Crestline Partners, he continued. It's real. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. That was the name Daniel had said. The name I wasn't supposed to remember. Registered in Delaware, Ray went on. 2 months ago. Minimal footprint. That usually means one thing. Shall I said. Exactly. I stood up and walked toward the window, the early morning light stretching across the yard. Ownership? I asked. Still confirming, he said. But there's already movement. That word landed differently. Movement. Transfers, he clarified. Small. Structured. Routed through internal accounts. I felt something settle. Not shock. Confirmation. They've already started, I said. Yes, he replied. Not planning. Executing. How much? Not enough to trigger immediate flags, he said, but enough to confirm intent. Intent. That was the difference between suspicion and proof. I'll call you again at 8, he said. We go deeper then. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, looking out at the yard, the same way I had the day before. Same trees. Same light. Same stillness. Nothing outside had changed. But now everything inside had. I walked into the kitchen and poured a cup of coffee. Not because I needed it. Because routine mattered. That was the rule now. Nothing changes. At 6:15, Maria came in through the side door, just like she had every morning for the past 22 years. Same time. Same steps. Same quiet presence. "You're up early," she said. "So are you," I replied. My tone didn't change. My posture didn't change. Nothing about me changed. That was the point. She nodded and moved toward the stove, starting breakfast without another word. Normal. Everything had to look normal. At 7 o'clock, I sat at the dining table and opened my laptop. Company accounts. Internal reports. Access logs. I didn't rush. I didn't search randomly. I followed structure. Patterns. Authorization levels. Recent activity. Anything Daniel had touched in the last 90 days. That was the window. That was where mistakes happen. At first, everything looked clean. Organized. Consistent. Exactly the way I had trained it to be. Then I saw it. Not a large transfer. Not anything obvious. Small movements. Individually insignificant. But consistent. Repeated. Structured. I leaned back slightly, my eyes moving across the screen again. Same pattern. Different accounts. Same endpoint. An account I didn't recognize. Crestline. I didn't react. I didn't lean forward. I didn't even blink differently. Because reaction changes behavior. And behavior creates risk. This wasn't a plan they were preparing. This was a plan already in motion. Which meant one thing. I was already late. At 7:58, my phone rang again. "Ray." "Got more," he said. I stood up and walked toward the study, closing the door behind me. "Talk." "I traced one of the routes," he said. "Offshore." That word didn't surprise me. It confirmed what I expected. "Came in structure," he continued. "Layered. Clean. Professional. Professional." That mattered. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't reactive. This was built. "How deep?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. Then he answered. "Deeper than a family dispute." I didn't respond. Because I already understood what that meant. This wasn't just about Daniel. Or Brooke. Or even Prescott. This was something larger. A system. A structure. Something that had worked before. And was working again. "I'll have more by noon," Ray said. "Focus on internal access," he added. "Anything he can move without oversight." "I'm already there," I replied. "I know," he said. Then the line went quiet. I stood in the study for a moment, looking at the files, the reports, the structure I had built over years of work. And now, I was seeing it differently. Not as something I created, but as something that could be taken, rewritten, moved, controlled. If I didn't stop it, I walked back into the kitchen and placed my phone on the counter. Maria had finished breakfast. Everything looked the same, smelled the same, felt the same. That was the illusion, and they were still inside it. They believed everything was proceeding exactly as planned. They believed I didn't know. They believed they were ahead. That belief was the only reason I still had time. I sat down at the table and picked up my coffee, holding it steady as I looked across the room. 3 days. That was what Ray needed. 2 days. That was what they thought they had left before execution. Which meant we were already closer than they realized. I took a slow sip and set the cup down. No hesitation. No doubt. Because at this point, there was only one thing left to do. Let them continue. Let them move. Let them believe they were winning. Because the moment they stopped being careful was the moment everything would start to break. And when it did, I was going to be ready. I didn't leave the house that morning. There was no reason to. Everything I needed was already here. Access, records, history, and most importantly, patterns. At 9:02 a.m., the doorbell rang. Right on time. Ray Delgado didn't arrive early. He didn't arrive late. He arrived exactly when he said he would. Maria opened the door and let him in without asking questions. She had been with me long enough to understand when something didn't need to be explained. "Study?" he asked. I nodded. We walked down the hallway together, neither of us speaking. Because there was nothing to say, until there was something to show. Claire arrived 5 minutes later. Same precision. Same control. Vivian came shortly after that, her expression tighter than usual, like she already sensed something was wrong even before she saw the details. We didn't sit in the living room. We didn't stand in the kitchen. We went straight into the study, closed the door, and everything shifted. Ray placed his briefcase on the desk and opened it slowly. No dramatic movement. No pause for effect. Just process. Let's start with what we can prove, he said. That sentence mattered, because it meant something simple. This wasn't theory anymore. This was evidence. He slid the first folder across the desk toward me. I opened it. Photographs. Brooke. Different locations. Different days. Always with the same man. Restaurant. Hotel lobby. Private office. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing obvious. But consistent. Deliberate. Marcus Driscoll, Ray said. I looked up. Former attorney, he continued. Disbarred. Financial fraud. Targeted retirees. Built trust, then dismantled it. The words were clean. Precise. Not exaggerated. Not emotional. Just facts. Connection? Claire asked. Ex-husband, Ray said. There was a slight pause in the room. Officially divorced, he added. Then, after a beat, unofficially, still working together. Vivian leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the photographs again. Working on what? She asked. Ray didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a second folder. This one heavier. Structured. Financial records. Transaction logs. Account mapping. He placed it in front of me. Crestline Partners, he said. The name landed exactly the way I expected it to. Controlled. Registered 2 months ago, he continued. Minimal footprint. No operational history. Shell. He flipped the first page. Listed ownership. I looked down. Daniel Mitchell. Brooke Calloway. Side by side. No ambiguity. No hidden layer. Direct. The room didn't react. Not immediately. Because sometimes, the absence of reaction means more than anything else. I didn't move. Not outwardly. But inside, something settled into place. This wasn't influence. This wasn't manipulation. This was participation. Ray continued. Your son didn't just plan to take control, he said. He's already been moving assets. He pointed to a series of transactions. Small amounts. Clean intervals. Distributed across multiple internal accounts. Nothing large enough to trigger alerts. But together, forming a pattern. A path. A system. Vivian spoke quietly. I knew something was off, she said. Her voice didn't shake, but it carried weight. Q1 projections didn't match internal reports, she added. Ray nodded once. They wouldn't, he said. Because this isn't random. He turned another page. This is structured extraction. Extraction. Not transfer. Not reallocation. Extraction. The word mattered. Because it defined intent. He reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a third folder. This one thinner. But sharper. Emails. Printed. Highlighted. Time-stamped. Daniel, Ray said. I already knew what I was about to see. But I looked anyway. Recipient. A competitor. Subject line. Proposal alignment. Attachments. Internal pricing. Vendor contracts. Client lists. Everything that made Mitchell Creek valuable. Sold. $350,000, Ray said. No emphasis. No pause. Just fact. Vivian exhaled slowly. That's why we lost Bellingham, she said. 2% difference. Her eyes moved across the page. He gave them our numbers. Ray didn't correct her, which meant she was right. He laid out 3 more. Documents. Different projects. Same pattern. Information leakage. Competitive undercutting. Contract loss. Systematic. Deliberate. I looked down at the files again, then back up at Ray. How much? I asked. 5.4 million, he said. Confirmed losses. Directly tied. The number didn't shock me. What mattered was the method. This wasn't about taking something valuable. This was about reducing its value first. Weakening it. Positioning it. So that when control transferred, it would be easier to rebuild under a different structure. Ray closed the folder slowly. This isn't just theft, he said. It's controlled collapse. Claire spoke next. And once control transfers, she said, they rebuild under Crestline. Ray nodded. Exactly. Everything aligned. The financial movement. The data leaks. The timing. The legal structure. It wasn't random. It was designed. I leaned back in my chair, my hands resting calmly in my lap. No tension. No hesitation. Just understanding. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I asked the only question that still mattered. Is that all? Ray looked at me for a second longer than before. Then he shook his head. No, he said. His tone changed. Not dramatically, but enough. That's just the business. He reached into the briefcase one last time. Pulled out another folder. Thicker than the others. More organized. More deliberate. He placed it on the desk, but didn't open it. And something about that told me everything I needed to know. Because whatever was inside that folder wasn't about money. And that meant it mattered more than anything else. Ray didn't open the last folder right away. He left it on the table between us, his hand resting lightly on the cover as if he was deciding how to present it. That hesitation was new. Up until this point, everything had been direct, clean, structured. Now there was a shift. Small, but enough to notice. This part, he said finally, you need to see clearly. Not quickly, not emotionally. Clearly. I didn't respond. I just reached forward and opened the folder myself. Medical records. My name at the top. Dr. Alan Prescott listed beneath it. Dates. Notes. Observations. 6 entries. 6. Separate episodes. Cognitive decline. Disorientation. Memory inconsistency. I stared at the pages, not because I didn't understand them, but because I recognized every date. Board meetings. Client presentations. Internal reviews. Days I remembered in full detail. Days where nothing was wrong. Days where everything had been under control. None of this is real, I said quietly. Ray didn't correct me. No, he replied. It's constructed. Constructed. Not misinterpreted. Not exaggerated. Built. He slid another set of documents toward me. 3 case files. Different names. Different years. Same pattern. Evelyn Thornton. 81 years old. 7 million in assets. Declared mentally unfit. Placed under conservatorship. Assets liquidated within 6 months. Next file. Robert Chong. 76. 9 million. Same sequence. Same outcome. Third file. Louise Whitfield. 72. Attempted. Failed. I looked up. Failed. Ray nodded. Her grandson is an attorney, he said. Independent evaluation. Timeline challenged. Inconsistencies exposed before the transfer completed. Claire leaned forward slightly. So Prescott has done this before, she said. More than once. Ray nodded. Confirmed 3, he replied. Likely more. The room went quiet. Not shocked. Not confused. Just aligned. Because everything we had seen up to this point fit into something larger. Vivian spoke softly. And Daniel knows this? That question stayed in the air. Not because it didn't have an answer, but because of what that answer meant. Ray didn't respond directly. Instead, he tapped the file in front of me. Your case follows the same timeline, he said. 6 months of documentation. Amendment prepared. Transfer scheduled. Saturday, 8:45. Everything aligned. Not loosely. Precisely. I closed the folder slowly. My fingers rested on the cover for a moment longer than necessary. Not hesitation. Recognition. 2 victims dead within a year. One who barely avoided it. And now me. I stood up and walked toward the window. Not because I needed distance, but because I needed perspective. The Japanese maple moved slightly in the wind. Same tree. Same yard. Same quiet motion. Nothing outside. Reflected what I was looking at. That's how these things work. They exist beneath the surface. Until they don't. Behind me, no one spoke. They weren't waiting for a reaction. They were waiting for a decision. I stayed there for a moment longer, then turned back. When does the injunction activate? I asked. Claire checked her notes. Saturday night, she said. 8:45. The same time. Not coincidence. Alignment. I nodded once. Good. Ray watched me carefully. You understand what this means, he said. His tone wasn't questioning. It was confirming. If you move forward, he continued, this doesn't stay contained. Legal exposure. Public record. Permanent consequences. Everything becomes visible. I held his gaze. They made it visible the moment they started. I said. There was a brief silence. Not disagreement. Acknowledgement. Claire closed her laptop. Vivian straightened in her chair. Ray gathered the files and placed them back into his case. Everything that needed to be said had been said. What remained was execution. And for the first time since the bakery, I wasn't thinking about what they were going to do. I was thinking about how I was going to end it. Saturday, 8:45. They believed that was the moment they would take everything. Control. Assets. Authority. My life. They believed they had already accounted for every detail. Every variable. Every outcome. That belief was the only mistake they made. Because they planned for me to hesitate. To question. To react emotionally. They didn't plan for this. Clarity. Timing. Control. I looked down at the folder one last time, then closed it completely. Because at this point, I didn't need more information. I had everything I needed. Proof. Timeline. Structure. Intent. And a decision. I walked back to the desk and picked up my phone. There were no missed calls, no messages, no signs that anything had changed. That was the illusion, and they were still inside it. They believed everything was proceeding exactly as planned. They believed I didn't know. They believed they were ahead. That belief was what was going to bring them exactly where I needed them to be. In one place, at one time, with no way out. I placed the phone back down and looked at Claire. Everything stays on schedule, I said. She nodded. Vivian didn't speak. Ray closed his case. And just like that, the plan shifted. Not theirs. Mine. Because in less than 24 hours, they were going to walk into a wedding believing they had already won. And in that same moment, everything they built was going to collapse. I woke up before the alarm. Not because I was restless, but because my mind had already moved ahead of the day. Saturday. The day they planned everything. The day I would end it. I sat up slowly and looked around the room. Same walls. Same light coming through the curtains. Same quiet. Nothing about the space had changed. But everything about what it meant had. I got out of bed and moved through my routine exactly the way I always did. Shower. Clothes. Coffee. No hesitation. No variation. Because that was the rule now. Nothing changes. At 6:15, Maria came in through the side door, just like she had every morning for the past 22 years. Same timing. Same rhythm. She paused when she saw me already in the kitchen. "You're up early," she said. "So are you," I replied. My tone didn't shift. My posture didn't shift. Nothing about me changed. She nodded and continued with breakfast. Normal. Everything had to stay normal. At 7:10, my phone vibrated once on the counter. A message from Ray. All confirmed. Evidence secured. Officers in place. I read it once. Then locked the screen. No reply. No unnecessary movement. At 7:14, another message. Claire. Injunction signed. Sealed. Activates on your signal. Everything aligned. Timing. Execution. Outcome. I picked up my coffee and walked into the living room, stopping in front of the wall of photographs again. Daniel at 5. Daniel at 18. Daniel standing beside me the day he joined the company. I didn't touch the frames. I didn't adjust anything. I just looked. Because this wasn't about changing the past. It was about deciding what happened next. At 10:58, there was a knock at my bedroom door. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Controlled. "Mom." Daniel. I opened the door. He stood there in his tuxedo, composed, confident, exactly as he should be on the day of his rehearsal dinner. Nothing about him looked different. That was the part that mattered. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. "Of course," I said. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at me, not searching, measuring, as if he was trying to confirm something. "Everything ready for tonight?" he asked. "Yes," I said. Simple, direct, exactly what he expected. He nodded slowly, then took a step closer. "There's something I need you to understand," he said. His voice lowered slightly. Not emotional, controlled. "Everything I've done," he paused, "I did because I love you." The words didn't land the way he thought they would. Not anymore. Because now I understood what they were. Not truth. Positioning. Just like everything else. I didn't react. I didn't challenge him. I didn't even question it. I simply looked at him and smiled. "I love you too, Daniel," I said. And that part was still true. That's what made it difficult. Not the betrayal. The truth that existed next to it. He stepped forward and hugged me. Held on slightly longer than usual. As if something about the moment felt different to him. Then he pulled back and nodded once. "I'll see you tonight," he said. "I'll be there," I replied. He turned and walked out of the room without looking back. The door closed quietly behind him. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting lightly against the wall. Not because I needed support, but because I needed stillness. Because that was the last normal moment. Everything after this was execution. At 2:30, I was dressed and ready. The mirror reflected exactly what it was supposed to. Composed. Controlled. Unchanged. No one looking at me would have seen anything different. That was the point. At 3:15, the car arrived. Driver. Route. Timing. Everything aligned. As planned. I stepped outside and paused briefly at the front of the house. The Japanese maple moved slightly in the wind. Same tree. Same motion. Nothing outside had changed. But inside, everything had. I got into the car and closed the door. The drive to the venue was quiet. No music. No conversation. Just the steady movement forward. At 4:02, we arrived. The venue was already active. Staff moving. Guests beginning to arrive. Everything exactly as it should be. Lights, decor, structure. The illusion was intact, and they were still inside it. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance. Each step measured, controlled, deliberate, because at this point, there was no uncertainty left. Only timing, only sequence, only outcome. Inside, everything moved exactly as planned. Daniel greeted guests. Brooke moved through the room with the same composed precision she always had. No hesitation, no concern, no awareness. They believed everything was working. They believed they were ahead. That belief was what brought them here. Exactly where I needed them. One place, one moment, one outcome. I took my seat and looked around the room one last time before everything began. People talking, laughing, unaware. That's how it always is. The moment before something breaks looks exactly like everything is fine. I checked my watch. Time was moving exactly the way it should. No delay, no deviation, perfect alignment. And for the first time since this started, I didn't think about what could go wrong. Because nothing could. Not anymore. Everything was already in place. All that remained was the moment it would begin. And in a few hours, everyone in that room was going to see the truth. By the time the reception settled into its rhythm, everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. Soft lights stretched across the white tent. Music carried just low enough to let conversations move easily between tables. Glasses touched. Laughter rose and fell. People moved through the space like nothing in the world could interrupt what they believed they were part of. From the outside, it was perfect. That was the point. At 7:30, Daniel and Brooke stepped onto the dance floor for their first dance. The band shifted into a slower tempo. Familiar. Intentional. The same song Richard and I had danced to years ago. I stood at the edge of the crowd and watched them. Daniel's hand rested at Brooke's back. Brooke leaned in slightly, saying something I couldn't hear. He smiled. Relaxed. Certain. Confident in a future he believed was already secured. For a moment, it almost looked real. That was the part people misunderstand. These moments don't feel false when you're inside them. They feel complete. Until they don't. The song ended. Applause moved through the tent in a smooth, practiced wave. The band softened, and the master of ceremonies stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, if we could have your attention for just a moment. The room responded exactly the way it always does. Chairs turned. Voices lowered. Expectations shifted. And now, he continued, the mother of the groom would like to say a few words. That was my cue. I stood up. No hesitation. No rush. And walked toward the stage. Each step measured. Each movement controlled. Because timing was everything. I reached the podium and placed my prepared speech on the surface in front of me. 3 pages. Printed. Structured. Everything I had written days earlier. Before I knew the truth, I rested my hand on it for a moment, then moved it aside. I didn't need it anymore. Good evening, I said. My voice carried cleanly through the room. Calm. Even. Exactly what they expected. I let my eyes move across the audience. Clients. Colleagues. Friends. People who had known me for years. People who trusted me. 34 years ago, I said, I held my son for the first time. A few smiles. A soft ripple of warmth across the room. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, I continued. Loud enough to make sure everyone knew he was there. Light laughter. Controlled. Predictable. I looked at Daniel. He was smiling. Relaxed. Still inside the moment. I watched him grow, I said. I watched him learn. I watched him become someone I believed I could trust with everything. I paused. Not long. Just enough. Marriage, I continued, is built on trust. The tone shifted. Subtle, but immediate. It's built on honesty. On the belief that the person standing beside you will protect you, not take from you. The room grew quieter. Not confused yet, but attentive. Because something had changed. I let the silence settle for 1 second longer than comfortable, then looked toward the back of the tent. Ray stood near the equipment, waiting. I gave a small nod. The screen behind me lowered slowly. At first, nothing appeared. Just a blank surface. Expectation built. Before tonight, I said, I believe trust was something that grew naturally. My voice didn't rise. It didn't break. It stayed steady. But this week, I learned something different. The first image appeared. An email. Large. Clear. Projected high enough for everyone to see. From Daniel. To a competitor. Attachments listed beneath. Confidential files. Internal data. Pricing structures. The reaction wasn't immediate. It moved slowly. A ripple. Confusion first. Then recognition. Then disbelief. Daniel stood up. Mom, what is this? His voice cut through the room. Sharp. Controlled, but not calm. I didn't look at him. Sit down, I said. My tone didn't change. No anger. No emphasis. Just instruction. He hesitated. Then sat. Because in that moment, something in him recognized that this wasn't what he expected. This, I said, turning back to the audience, is internal company data. Sold for $350,000. The room shifted again. More voices. More movement. The illusion was breaking. I pressed the remote. The screen changed. Crestline Partners. Ownership records. Names listed clearly. Daniel Mitchell. Brooke Calloway. Side by side. Brooke's expression changed first. Subtle, but visible. This isn't, she started. I didn't stop her. I didn't respond. Because the next image was already appearing. Financial transfers. Account routing. Movement patterns. Together, I said, they structured a transfer of assets totaling $58 million. The number didn't need emphasis. It carried itself. Heavy. Final. I checked my watch. 8:44, exactly where it needed to be. 3 minutes from now, I said, every account connected to these transactions will be frozen under court order. Phones came out. Watches checked. Conversations stopped. Because now, everyone understood something was happening. Something real. Something immediate. Daniel moved again. Not standing. Not speaking. Just shifting. Looking for an exit that wasn't there anymore. 8:45, the screen changed. Transfer blocked. Court order. Active. No delay. No error. Perfect execution. And in that exact moment, movement began at the edges of the tent. Plainclothes officers. Calm. Direct. Controlled. Daniel stood up quickly. Too quickly. They were already there. Daniel Mitchell. One of them said, "You are under arrest." No raised voice. No hesitation. Just procedure. Prescott stood as well. His expression didn't change. That told me everything. This wasn't new to him. Dr. Alan Prescott, another officer, said, "You are under arrest for fraud and falsifying medical records." Brooke didn't move. At first. Then slowly, her knees gave out. She sank down onto the floor. No scream. No scene. Just silence. The kind that happens when there's nothing left to deny. I stepped away from the podium. No final words. No explanation. Because everything that needed to be said had already been shown. The truth didn't need reinforcement. It stood on its own. As I walked down from the stage, I didn't look back. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't look at Brooke. I didn't look at Prescott. Because that moment was no longer about them. It was about something else entirely. Control. Clarity. And an ending that finally belonged to me. The moment the officers stepped in, the entire tent changed. Not gradually. Completely. Music stopped mid-note. Conversations collapsed into silence. Every movement slowed, as if people needed a second to understand what they were seeing, and then another to accept it. Daniel reacted first. Not with panic. With control. Or at least an attempt at it. "Mom, wait," he said, stepping forward. "You don't understand." His voice was steady, but not calm. Not anymore. I turned to face him. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough to meet his eyes. "I understand exactly," I said. No emphasis. No emotion. Just truth. The officer moved in beside him, placing a hand at his arm. "Daniel Mitchell," he repeated, "you are under arrest." Daniel didn't fight. Not physically. But he didn't step forward either. For a brief moment, he stood there, suspended between what he believed was happening and what actually was. That moment passed quickly. The handcuffs clicked. Clean. Final. Behind him, another officer approached Prescott. Prescott didn't resist. He didn't question. He didn't argue. He simply closed his briefcase, set it down, and extended his hands. "Dr. Alan Prescott," the officer said, "you are under arrest for fraud and falsifying medical records." Prescott lowered his eyes slightly. Not in shame. In acknowledgement. Like a man who had calculated the risk and simply reached the end of it. Brooke remained in the center of the tent. Still. Completely still. Then something in her shifted. Not outwardly at first. Just a small break in the posture she had held all evening. Her shoulders dropped. Her breath changed. And then her knees gave out. She sank to the ground without a sound. No scream. No denial. No attempt to explain. Just silence. The kind that happens when there is nothing left to defend. Maria moved first, crossing the distance quickly, kneeling beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Not because she had to, because that's what she does. She responds, even when there is nothing left to fix. I stepped down from the stage. No announcement. No closing words. Because there was nothing left to say. The truth had already been delivered, and it didn't need reinforcement. At 10:03 p.m., I was back in my study. The same room where everything had started to come together. Claire was there. Ray. Vivian. Maria. No one spoke immediately. Because this wasn't a moment for reaction. It was a moment for confirmation. Claire broke the silence first. The injunction is active, she said. Her voice was steady. All associated accounts are frozen. Federal authorities have been notified. This is no longer a civil matter. Not civil. Criminal. Ray added without looking up from his notes. Financial routing through Crestline is already being traced. Offshore layers are collapsing. Collapsing. That word fit. Because everything they built was now working against them. Vivian stood near the window, arms crossed, looking out at the yard. What happens to Daniel? She asked. The question didn't come from curiosity. It came from understanding. Because she knew what the answer meant. I didn't respond immediately. I let the question settle. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I understood the weight of it. He faces the charges, I said finally. My voice didn't change. Corporate fraud. Data theft. Financial conspiracy. Vivian nodded once. No surprise. Just acknowledgement. Claire looked at me carefully. You can make a statement, she said, about how far you want to pursue it. I understood what she meant. There are always choices. Even after something like this. Reduce exposure. Limit damage. Control narrative. But those choices come with a cost. And I had already paid enough. Proceed as filed, I said. No hesitation. No adjustment. Ray finally looked up. You're certain? He asked. Not questioning. Confirming. I held his gaze. Yes. Because at this point, this wasn't about punishment. It was about structure. If something like this is allowed to exist, it continues. Claire nodded slowly. Then it moves forward, she said. Clean. Final. Maria stood quietly near the door. She hadn't spoken since the tent. But her presence remained steady. Consistent. Grounded. That mattered more than anything she could have said. The room settled again. Not heavy. Not tense. Resolved. Because everything had shifted. Not just the situation. The direction. For months, everything had been moving toward a single outcome. One I was never supposed to see. One I was never supposed to stop. And now, it had ended somewhere else entirely. Not because it collapsed on its own. Because it was confronted. Exposed. Stopped. I looked around the room one last time. Claire. Ray. Vivian. Maria. Each of them had played a role. Not in creating the situation, but in ending it. That distinction mattered. Because it meant something simple. This wasn't about losing control. It was about taking it back. And for the first time since this started, there was nothing left to prepare. Nothing left to uncover. Nothing left to stop. Only what came next. And whatever that was, it would come from truth. 8 months passed. Not slowly. Not quickly. Just forward. That's the part people don't tell you. After something like this happens, time doesn't stop. It doesn't wait for you to understand it. It moves the same way it always has. Steady. Uninterrupted. The case unfolded exactly the way Claire said it would. Quiet at first. Documents. Filings. Depositions. Then faster. Charges formalized. Evidence presented. Patterns confirmed. Then final. Daniel was convicted on multiple counts. Wire fraud. Corporate espionage. Theft of trade secrets. 8 years. Restitution ordered. The numbers were precise. The outcome wasn't. Because no sentence ever matches what something like this actually costs. Dr. Prescott lost his license. Permanently. 7 years. And more importantly, the previous cases were reopened. Evelyn Thornton. Robert Chong. Names that had been reduced to files were finally seen for what they were. Victims. What he had done didn't disappear quietly anymore. Brooke cooperated. Testified. The structure she helped build became the evidence that dismantled it. Marcus Driscoll was sentenced shortly after. 12 years. The system they created collapsed the same way it had been built. Layer by layer. Nothing dramatic. Nothing sudden. Just removal. Mitchell Creek interiors stabilized. Not immediately. Not perfectly. But steadily. Vivian stepped into leadership without hesitation. Clients returned. Not all of them. but enough. Because trust, once broken, doesn't come back all at once. It comes back the same way it leaves. Slowly, carefully, deliberately. On paper, everything was resolved. Accounts secured, control restored, structure intact. But life doesn't close the same way a case does. Because there are parts of it that don't fit into documents. Parts that don't get resolved in court. Parts that stay. In December, my phone rang. Unknown number. I knew who it was before I answered. Mom. His voice was different. Not weaker. Not broken. Just quieter. Stripped of something it used to carry. I know you don't have to talk to me, he said. I need to say this. I didn't interrupt him. Because this wasn't a conversation. This was something else. I didn't start this for the money, he said. The words didn't change anything. But I let him continue. I felt invisible, he said. That one stayed. After Dad died, after the business, everything became about surviving. About rebuilding. About you being strong. He paused. And I didn't know where I fit in that. I stood there, holding the phone, listening. Not reacting. Just hearing. She told me I deserved more, he continued. That I was being held back. That I was living in something you built, not something I created. Another pause. And I believed it, he said. Because it was easier than facing the truth. What truth? I asked. My voice didn't change. That I resented you, he said. Not anger. Not blame. Just honesty. For being able to rebuild everything, when I couldn't even figure out who I was without him. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had never been said. Everything that had been avoided. Everything that had grown in that space. I hear you, I said finally. And I did. But I'm not ready to forgive you. Not yet. Okay, he said. No argument. No defense. Just acceptance. We ended the call without anything else. No resolution. No closure. Just truth. Weeks later, I visited him. The room was small. Neutral. Designed to remove everything except what needed to be faced. He looked older. Not in years. In understanding. We sat across from each other without speaking at first. Because there wasn't anything left to hide behind. No roles. No structure. No control. Just two people, finally seeing each other clearly. We didn't fix everything that day. That wasn't possible. But something shifted. Not externally. Internally. Because for the first time in a long time, we weren't performing. We were honest. When I drove home, the house looked the same as it always had. The same driveway. The same windows. The same quiet. But when I stepped out of the car, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to in weeks. The Japanese maple. Small red leaves, starting to push through the branches. Spring. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't wait for things to be resolved. It arrives anyway. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Not thinking about the case. Not thinking about the outcome. Just observing. Because sometimes, that's all you can do. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't see before. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about distance. The kind that doesn't appear all at once. The kind that grows quietly, between conversations that don't happen, between things that don't get said, between moments that are missed. I spent years building a company strong enough to survive anything. Pressure, loss, uncertainty. But I didn't build the same kind of structure with my son. And that space is where everything broke. If there's one thing this leaves behind, it's this. Success can replace almost anything. Security, stability, control. But it can't replace presence. And if you wait too long to give that, sometimes the cost is more than you ever planned to lose. If you're still here with me, I want to ask you something. If you were standing where I stood that night, would you have exposed the truth? Or would you have chosen a different ending?